bless you, Lord.
I was a nervous wreck. I'm used to saying, what do you think, Ralph? Laura, Steve. All I had was Steve right there with a camera. So it made it kind of tough. So either way, it's good to be here. And I do want to thank Steve for the last 2 weeks of lessons. It was my turn, but I had a little vacation. And so anyway, I appreciate that, Steve. Now, for our lesson today, and you've heard me do an introduction like this before, bear with me. There are many Bible characters that we know a lot about. People that there's whole books written about them, or whole chapters of books written about them. But then there are these other people that you don't hear much about. People that are only mentioned in passing, or found in only 1 or 2 places in the Bible. And a lot of these people are overlooked. A lot of times we don't even know who they are when we see them. But they are in the Bible for a reason. And that reason is to teach us valuable lessons. So let's look at a picture today of who we're going to be talking about today. Can y'all see that? Now that is not Gene, and that is not Dale, okay, just so you know. But that looks like a woman that's driving a spike in a man's head, don't it? Now does anybody know who that is besides Ansel Sr.? And y'all probably think, where in the world did you come up with this at? It's his fault. About 2 months ago, he said, you ever heard about that lady that drove that spike in that man's head? I said, no, not really. So anyway, once he said that, I researched her, and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting, so thought I'd teach a lesson on her. And this woman's name is Jael, Jael. Some people call her Jael. And the man is Sisera. I think it's Sisera. I think that's his name. So anyway, here's what I hope we can learn from this lesson. Put that other picture up. Jael stepped out on faith, on purpose, and without fear. That's something we all should do, right? Do we? Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. So Jael's story is told in the book of Judges in chapter 4. And before we start reading about Jael, this is a 2-week lesson, by the way. Before we start reading about her, let's do a little background on the book of Judges. Now, the history of Israel as recorded in the book of Judges is one of repeating circumstances. Don't start yawning already, Misty. I called Laura out like that one time, didn't I, Laura? But in other words, the same thing happened over and over and over again in Judges. Israel would for many years turn away from God, and they'd worship idols, do all kinds of stuff they shouldn't do. And then God would allow a nation to come in and take over Israel and cause them hardship. And this would go on for a while until Israel say, Lord, come help us. We need some help. And then God would raise up a judge that would lead the people of Israel to defeat these enemies. And for the rest of the life of that judge, the Israelites would follow God. But after the death of that judge, Israel would return back to their old ways, and this cycle would start all over again. And in the midst of one of these cycles, that's where Jael comes in the picture. Anybody ever heard of her? Interesting. So anyway, let's all turn to Judges chapter 4. We're going to be reading verses 1 through 18, I think. So let's start off in verse 1. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord when Ehud was dead. So here in verse 1, it starts off with Israel's rebellion after the death of Judge Ehud. So this removal of this judge left Israel without any religious backing. So these Israelites were doing whatever they wanted to do. It was evil and it was worshiping idols. So verse 2 and 3. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, for he had 900 chariots of iron. And 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. So God allowed Jabin to become the new king with this man named Sisera as the commander of the army. And this Sisera guy was a very, very powerful man, and he was a cruel man. And these 900 chariots of iron showed the true strength of this army. And this army came against Israel for 20 years. Now, let's talk about these chariots for a minute. Now, these chariots were the tanks of the ancient world. They were made of iron or wood. They were pulled by 1 or 2 horses and were the most feared and the most powerful weapon of the day. Some of these chariots even had little razors, sharp razor knives, extending from the wheels out to mutilate helpless armies on foot. So the Canaanite army, they had 900 chariots. That's a lot of chariots. So it was not within Israel's power to defeat such an army. So this helped Jabin and Sisera. They didn't have any trouble controlling the people. And after 20 years of this, the Israelites finally reached out to God for help. Took them 20 years. You know, we should be reaching out to him all the time, shouldn't we? Anytime we're facing a struggle or any kind of dilemma. But these Israelites, they did things their own way, and they got in a mess. And we do the same thing, Brother Dale, don't we? Trying to control our own lives without God's help. And when we do that, what happens? Cause ourselves a lot of pain and a lot of struggling. And this is a lesson these Israelites never seem to get. You know, it took them 20 years to come back and ask God for help. Verse 4. And Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time. So here we're introduced to Deborah. She was an unusual woman. She had a lot of wisdom, and she had a lot of influence. And she was actually one of only 4 Old Testament women identified as a prophetess, and was the only female judge. And notice in here that Deborah was a prophetess without her husband being a prophet. So that kind of throws out that theory. To be a prophetess, you got to have a husband as a prophet. So a prophet or a prophetess is a call from God. And this does not mean that her husband was a weak man, because his name actually means torch, which shows the magnitude of the strength he had. Now, it was also unusual for her to be a judge as well as a prophetess. And that is another position that's called of God. And she did all the tasks of a judge except for military leadership. She performed legal and military duties, but she was not a leader of the military. And this just shows how God can use anybody to do his will. Old or young, men or women, it don't matter. So don't let your prejudice get a hold of you when he's led somebody to you and you think, you need to get that out of your mind. Just let that person lead you, because he chose that person to lead you. Verse 5. And she dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel and Mount Ephraim. And the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. So Deborah sat under this palm tree, and people came from her from all areas of the land to get her advice so she could counsel them on any matter of difficulty that they were going through. And this tree became known as the tree of Deborah because she judged under this tree. And actually, this palm tree tells us a lot about the character of Deborah. She was very humble. And she was not a proud woman. Just think, she could have picked being a judge, she could have picked the most grand of places for people to come and talk to her. But she didn't do that. She just picked a tree out in the woods. Verse 6. And she sent and called Barak, the son of Abinom, out of, I have no idea how to say that right there. I'm just going to let that word go, Brother Steve. And said unto him, hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, go and draw toward Mount Tabor, and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and of the children of Zebulun. So when she said, hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, so shows that she is speaking the words that God actually gave her. He told her explicitly what to do. And she's passing this on to Barak. And Barak was to lead the men into battle against these heavily equipped enemies. Verse 7. And I will draw unto thee to the river Kishon Sisera, the captain of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into thine hand. This had to be a hard choice for Barak. This army of Jabin had so many war weapons, and Barak only had 10,000 men. But the Lord is the one that's going to fight this battle, because he's the one that gave the orders to Deborah. And Barak, he needs to have faith that God is going to do what he's commanded he will do. Verse 8. And Barak said unto her, if thou wilt go with me, then I will go. But if thou wilt not go with me, then I will not go. So you may look at this as a weakness on Barak's part, but actually it's not. It's just showing his high opinion of Deborah. She was a judge. She was a prophetess. And he knew if he had her with him, she could pray to God, she could reach God for him to help him. to give him advice, to give him counsel when an emergency situation came up. And also, God had not spoken to Barak. He spoke to Deborah. So Barak would have more faith in Deborah's message because he gave that message to her. He knew if God had really spoken to her, she was going to go with him. Verse 9. And she said, I will surely go with thee, notwithstanding the journey that thou takest shall not be for thine honor, for the Lord shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And Deborah rose and went with Barak to Kadesh. So Deborah promised to go with him. She would not send him anywhere that she wouldn't go herself. And she didn't deceive him either. You know, she told him, said, look, the honor of winning this battle is not going to go to you. It's going to go to a woman. Verse 10. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and he went up with 10,000 men in his feet, and Deborah went up with him. So Barak did what he was told. He went and collected 10,000 men, and they marched with him on foot, ready to fight. And Deborah went with him. She was encouraging him along the way, both his men and her and him. Just by her being there was a big plus. She would give her best advice on when this battle was going to start and when this battle was going to end. She had to be in the forefront of this battle for Barak's faith to be strong. Verse 11 and 12. Now Heber the Kenite, which was one of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, had severed himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent unto the plain of Zonaham, which is by Kadesh. And they showed Sisera that Barak the son of Abinoam was gone up to Mount Tabor. Now you're going to see in verse 17 here in a minute that this guy named Heber was Jael's husband. So he was helping Jabin. So he tells Sisera that, hey, Barak, he sent this army of 10,000 people. He's gone to Mount Tabor. Now we got to remember that God has chosen this battleground. Okay? And it was actually God who caused Heber to settle in this area. God had all the plans, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. Verse 13. And Sisera gathered together all his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him, from Harosheth of the Gentiles unto the river of Kishon. So when this says he gathered together, that means his people were all over the place. You know, one group was here, another group was here. And they picked a place by the river, which was large enough to put all of these chariots. But being near this river and at the foot of the mountain, they was going to have a hard time maneuvering all these 900 chariots around. Another reason God chose this spot for that battle. Verse 14. And Deborah said unto Barak, Up, for this is the day in which the Lord hath delivered Sisera unto thine hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men after him. So Deborah, through an inspiration of God, says, this is the day. This is the day. She knew the precise day, the exact time in which Sisera's army was going to be destroyed. And she actually speaks of it like it's in the past tense, like it already happened. Why is that? Because she knew it was going to happen. God is going to go before them and win this battle which is going to be a victory for Israel. Verse 15. And the Lord discomfited Sisera. That's a strange word. And all his chariots and all his host with the edge of the sword before Barak, so that Sisera lighted down off his chariot and fled away on his feet. So that word actually means made him feel uneasy. He may have embarrassed him, because his army was getting defeated. So he felt so bad, he just ran away. He was feared, so he just ran away. And what's interesting, Barak's troops were greatly outnumbered. We already talked about this. But we know that one person with God can go against 1,000 without God. Love that saying. Verse 16. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles, and all the host of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. So Barak followed this army. He destroyed them, and not a single one of them was left except their big boss, the head Kachino, Sisera. 997,000 of Sisera's army was slain. Slain by 10,000 people. Think God had a hand in that? Here's another good example how the Lord can make a hero out of an ordinary person. People who are loyal and courageous to carry out his mission are going to be victorious no matter what. Verse 17. Howbeit Sisera fled away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. See, there you go. For there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. So here we see old Heber. He is the husband of Jael. And it's kind of strange. He was actually from the Kenite tribe, which was a longtime ally of Israel. But for some reason, Heber decided to support Jabin. Maybe because Jabin's army was so much bigger than Barak's. Either way, Heber supported Jabin and his forces, and Jael said, no way, I'm not supporting him. So Sisera, he made his escape. He went to the tent of Jael, and he thought, hey, I'm going to be safer in this tent than in town, especially in a tent of a woman where he imagined nobody was going to ever look in a tent of a woman. Verse 18. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said unto him, turn in, my lord, turn in to me, fear not. And when he had turned in unto her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle. So old Sisera, he couldn't be more pleased than when Jael offered him a tent for him a hiding place. First of all, because he knew Jael was the wife of Heber, a man that had been loyal to him by giving him all this information. So she certainly could be trusted. Secondly, as we said a few minutes ago, men were never allowed to enter a woman's tent. No one would ever think to look in there for him. So when Jael saw him coming, she knew him. She steps forward. She invites him into the tent. And she actually addresses him as Lord. So she's showing him honor. She's showing him respect. Knowing, hey, he's a general of an army. Then she shows him hospitality. She's very sincere to him. She says, look, you don't have to fear nothing from me. You don't have to fear nothing from my house. So he said, okay. So then he laid down on the ground. She covered him with a mantle, which is a garment, like a blanket. Now, she either covered him to hide him, or from him maybe catching cold, because, you know, he obviously was sweating through the journey, or maybe just to make him comfortable so he could sleep. Either way, this is a good stopping point for today. How's that for jerking the rug out from under you, Ralph? Right before the climax of the story, when she kills him, I'm going to cut you off. But anyway, I hope we're finishing a little early today, Steve, but that's okay. I hope everyone's enjoying this lesson. I love to teach about these women and men that stuck off in the corner of the Bible that we don't know nothing about. It's just a good lesson for us. So we're going to pick back up next week. We're going to finish our story about old JL. So anyway, Ansel Sr., since this is your fault, can you go ahead and dismiss us?